What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another conversation. Today, I'm joined by Stephen L. Sears. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing well, sir. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Couldn't be any better right now. I mean, it's a little cold outside, but
Couldn't be any better. Wow.
couldn't be any better. Yeah,
Boy, that's a bar to hit.
just freezing when you walk outside, but other than that, it's fine as long as you stay in.
Where are you located, by the way?
Ohio.
Oh, I've heard of it. Okay.
So, where are you from originally?
Originally, way back in the ancient days. I'm a military brat. So I was born on a base, Fort Gordon, Georgia, which has now been renamed. It's Fort Eisenhower, but that's near Augusta, Georgia. And yeah, I was born there. And then because I was a military brat, my dad was in the Army. My brother, my mother, my dad, and we traveled every 3 years, either around the world or to different places. I think we were like Jacksonville, Florida. Then we went to Worms, Germany, Tacoma, Washington, Fort Knox, Kentucky, St. Augustine, Florida, which is where my dad finally retired. So basically, I say I'm from Florida.
Okay. What's that like? Just moving that much? Like, what's that experience like?
It's actually that is a conversation among what we refer to as brats. We are brats, military brats. And it's something we're used to. So let's put it this way. I don't know what it means to nest. All my friends, when I went to high school, because we retired just as I was going to high school, they had lived in their small towns, the majority of them, their entire lives. All their friends were people they had grown up with. I didn't know what that was like. You make friends every 3 years. You have to reinvent yourself. You're in a new school. You have to make new friends. Now, as a result, I've got friends all around the country and all around the world, people I shared experiences with. But there's a lot of differences if you grow up as a military brat, not just moving around, but literally the on-base experience. I used to be lulled to sleep at night by the sound of mortar fire in the distance, because that was the training grounds. Mm-hmm. I know what it's like to be out playing in the backyard and 4 or 5 Cobra helicopters go flying over your head. Of course, now they're Blackhawks and other helicopters. I've seen my mother go out and basically hit a M60 Patton tank with a broom to get it off of our curb. So
that's an experience. That's a story not a lot of people have.
That is a true thing. But you know something? Actually, quite honestly, that particular story about my mother, which was hysterical, because she was about 5'3" and she was out there literally hitting the back of the bumper section of this M60 that had jumped up on the curb. But the military family experience, every brat out there kind of knows what I'm talking about. They're probably going, yeah, that's what it was like.
Do you find yourself getting restless once you do settle?
Yep. Yeah. In fact, when we retired to St. Augustine, the interesting thing about my dad is he had retired and he became an administrator for a health organization, which he co-owned. And we, of course, moved into a house. We bought a house. Actually, first we rented a house while we were building a house. He had bought the land, so we built a house. Then 3 years after we built that house, he had to build another one. Then 3 years after that, he built another one. So it's kind of like we stayed in the same city, but we just couldn't get that travel gene out of our system. And it's the same thing with me today. I have a huge wanderlust for travel and for things that interest me, and find people fascinating because I've seen so many different versions of them. It's actually, some people will say, oh, that's a horrible way to grow up. I don't think so, man. I had a great time.
Sounds fascinating. Definitely probably lends to a lot of stories, which transitions into what made you want to get into writing, producing.
I didn't. There you go. Okay, so scene, end of show, right there. No, I had no intention of being a writer, none whatsoever. And anybody who's heard me speak on this before, go get a cup of coffee or something like that. You've heard this story before. But while I was, I can trace the psychology to this all the way back to my childhood. But one of the things about reinventing yourself every 3 years is you have to actually create a new mask for everybody. We all wear masks, but different environments, you use different masks. So I became an actor. I was, doing things in high school. I was acting in St. Augustine. They had a a state play, the state play of Florida called Cross and Sword, which celebrated the founding of the city. St. Augustine is the oldest permanently inhabited European community in the United States. So they had a big play musical, and I auditioned for it, and I got into that. It was my first professional acting experience. And so I was doing regional theater, like I said, school theater. And so when I graduated high school and went to college, obviously my degree was going to be in medicine. My dad, like I said, was part of a health organization. I love science. I used to hang out at the hospital. So I started out pre-med until Chem 101 knocked me into liberal arts, because I got a C in chemistry. You can't really become a doctor if you have a C in chemistry. And I had kind of an epiphany moment during that, which, as a side issue, actually deals with the actor Richard Dreyfuss and an Academy Award that he had just won. But I realized I wanted to be an actor. So I called my dad, said, hey, not going to be a doctor. I'm going to be an actor. And he was 100% behind me. His reaction was, you've always loved it, go do it. So I transferred from the University of Florida and made my way to Florida State University, which had one of the top theater programs in the Southeast, and graduated there with a degree in performance and moved out to Los Angeles. You are kind of getting the long version. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
So anyway, when I got out here, and I'm in Los Angeles now, I immediately, started getting little odd jobs to pay my rent. And of course, as an actor, I had to be a waiter. So at the restaurant I worked at, I met a guy named Burt Pearl, and he and I became best friends. Now, during this, I was taking acting classes and I was meeting casting directors. And one of the things I overheard from the casting directors is that they were tired of seeing prepared material. They could just mouth the words along because people were doing, scenes from movies and plays. And I decided to start writing my own material. So I just write three-minute scenes. That's it. Now, while I was doing that, I was also getting scripts to break down into outlines, for examples, just to figure out how they worked. Because I figured, as an actor, if I understood how it worked, I would have a better shot. Mm-hmm. Now, my friend Bert was also interested in this. So we started breaking down scripts just for the fun of it and writing scripts just for the fun of it. I would also call production houses and ask them if they had writer's guides. And writer's guides are given out to freelance writers to tell them what the show is about, what episodes they've done. So I called this one show that just came on the air. It was called Riptide. And I got somebody on the phone and I asked if they had a writer's guide. And they said, well, we don't have a writer's guide. Most of the companies won't even talk to you. But, why not call? Well, who did it hurt? So this person I was talking to, this woman, she said, we don't have a writer's guide, but do you like the show? And I was like, oh, God, I love the show. It's great. And she goes, oh, and then we started talking about Florida. Because she said, where are you from? I said, Florida. Oh, I have relatives in Florida. We had this whole conversation that had nothing to do with the business. So at the end of that conversation, she said, have you ever written any scripts? And I said, well, my partner and I rewrite them for fun. And she said, well, the producers are always looking. If you have an agent, send them in. I went, okay, thanks. And that was it. Didn't get her name. She didn't get my name. I had met an agent, told him this story. He said, I'll send something in. So he sent in a script. And a month later, Bert and I were called into a meeting at Riptide. We went in, we met the producers, and I'm going to shorten this tremendously. But by the third meeting, in the third meeting we had with them, we found out that we had actually gotten an assignment the meeting before. Now, again, Bert and I did not know anything about this because neither one of us were wanting to be writers. We were not trained to be writers. We had never taken classes in this. We were just kind of like, this is fun, let's go do it. So off of that first draft that we turned in for that script, they then wanted to hire us on staff. And that started my career. 40 years later, that is where it started, and it hasn't stopped.
That's awesome. Like, kind of as just a hobby of, the script writing. That's fascinating, and using that to, help your acting. I that's an awesome origin story. I've never heard that story before, like from a lot of people. So I like that a lot.
And for me, it was passion. I loved doing it. I was in a lot of naivete, but I also was kind of, or fearless or stupid, depending on which way you look at it, because back then you were told, don't call a production office. They'll just hang up on you. And I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? They're not going to know who I am. So I would call. It's like that old adage, it's who you know. Well, yeah, but get to know them. Go ahead and make the overtures, call them. So yeah, it was a combination of things. Plus, I don't want to, take credit away from this. Burt and I did have something on the page that was worthwhile. And obviously we did after that point, because, it took me 2 years before I accepted I was a professional writer. And Burt and I worked together as a team on 3 different shows. Then we split up and worked on, I think, 2 more shows as separate writers. And then he went off to be very successful as well. He was exec producer for Touched by an Angel. And unfortunately, Burt passed away in 2006, which is a big loss for everybody. He was just an incredible person. So, but yeah, go figure. I kind of backed my way into it. And by the way, the first time I ever wrote a script was because a spec script, just, writing for the fun of it, was because there had been a performers showcase where actors will go in and perform for, they invite agents, they invite producers, they invite everybody. And there were 7 scenes being done at this showcase. And when I showed up to do mine with my partner, which was not Burt, it was somebody else, out of the 7 scenes, 5 of those scenes had been written by me. People had gotten copies. And afterwards, one of the casting directors asked me, they said, "Did you write all those?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And she said, "You should think about being a writer." And immediately I just went, no, that's typing. And that's like, I can't do that. So that night I pulled out a script and looked at it and thought, why not? So overnight I wrote the worst script that has ever been written. It's a horrible script. To this day, I look on it and I go, my God, that's horrible. But I loved it. I loved every part of it. So I got to do this again. Now, from the moment I wrote that first script to the moment I was sitting in an office with an assistant with a salary to write TV shows was only about 1 year. And that's the closest you're going to hear to an overnight story, because I started from absolutely no intention of being a writer. And thank goodness it happened. I mean, I still love acting and I still do it to this day, but I love writing, really love writing.
Did you find that, you said you moved around and met a lot of new people. Did you find that helped when you started writing 1 and 2, when you were sit down with to interview, to be on a show or to call the studios? Did you find those skills?
Yeah, it's all intertwined, really. It's kind of hard to say, which came first, the chicken or the egg, although scientifically it's the egg, just saying. Evolutionarily, it's the egg. But whatever it was that allowed me to go from school to location to location and make friends very quickly was an outgoing part of my personality. But I realized later on it was also a performance part of my personality. So when I started acting, in retrospect, of course, I was going to try acting, especially improv. And in improv, you are put into a situation and you have to create your character and react immediately. And so I was good at that. So when I go into meetings, I'm basically using improv. But I am fascinated by people. So I study people, and I don't mean study them in a clinical sense. I just can't stop myself. I'm fascinated by how they work, what they think, and what motivates them. So every time I would go into a meeting, I would unconsciously scan the office, and I would get a sense for who this person was. Because everybody in an office, you bring little bits of your life back into the office because you don't want to be drudged down by your business. You want to have reminders of your home. And so it became very easy for me to talk to people. And I didn't really have any fear of looking stupid because I was an actor. So it's all kind of intertwined in that. But you are correct. My fascination with people has probably led to not just the way I am, but also to the way I develop characters and story.
Mm-hmm. So you finally get, your show's written, it's airing on television. What is that feeling like when, you get to call your parents, your friends, and be like, something I wrote is airing on TV tonight? That's got to be exciting.
All right. Well, 2 stories about that. The first time I ever appeared on national television, I was an actor. Okay. And it was for the TV series, the soap opera, General Hospital. And in General Hospital, I just really had what they called an under 5. It was only one line. And there had been some big automobile accident, and there was a horrible storm going on. And so all the scene was is they wheel me in a wheelchair. And Dr. Leslie, I think it was, she says, don't worry, you're going to be okay. And I say, it hurts. And she says, well, it should. You broke it. And then they go take him up to x-ray. So, my mother, who was just my biggest fan and just, such an awesome person, when she found out about this, the entire town knew. Everybody knew Steve was going to be on TV, General Hospital. This was awesome. Now, this was before I learned things such as framing. Like right now, you can see the frame. Here's my frame. There's my frame. You've got a frame. Okay. So they're wheeling me in a wheelchair, and I'm emoting all over the place because in my mind, I have broken my arm or broken my wrist. So I'm just like, oh, it hurts. Oh, it hurts. I'm just like, there I am. I'm Laurence Olivier. It hurts. I'm just going to go crazy with this. So when they wheeled me in, I'm in a wheelchair, and all you can see is I'm doing this. And I say, it hurts. So what does it look like I'm doing? It looks like I'm grabbing not my arm. And of course, she says, well, it should hurt. You broke it. And then they took me away. So that became kind of a running gag for a while when I would go back home. But the first time I saw my writing credit, I was actually at home alone. And, I'd seen it already in the answer prints in our production offices because, we have to go through the post-production, put it all together. Then we do an answer print and we look at it. Everything seems cool. Ship it to the network. So I'm at home by myself and I'm watching it. The episode comes on. There's the logo Riptide. And here it comes up and it says written by Stephen L. Sears and Burt Pearl. And I just went like this. That was it. Wow. I kind of expected more fireworks. Now, the second time, I was in a store called Circuit City. Some people have heard about this store. It's not around anymore, but it was an electronics store. So televisions, receivers, whatever you want to play, record players, if anybody remembers what those are. So I'm standing in line and I'm recording it at home. So I know I'll record it, but I'm standing in line. And I'm looking at the watch and it's coming up on 8 o'clock and I'm thinking, okay. And then I look around and I realize this place is filled with televisions. So I turned to the person behind me and I said, would you mind saving my spot? And I went around and turned every channel to channel 4, which was NBC in Los Angeles, got back in line. This person's looking at me like, what was that all about? And I just went, hold on. Then it felt cool because my name, boom, 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 all over that store. So yeah, that was an awesome feeling.
Well, so when you do write a show, do you stay on set while they're filming in case they need any rewrites? How does that process work?
Every show is different. And for the most part, no, writers don't do that for the most part. And this is a contentious issue in Hollywood about how writers are regarded, because the idea that script is done, you don't need the writer anymore. And then everybody else thinks, oh, I know the alphabet. I know how to write, which is just not true. So if I'm working on staff, and most of my shows I have either on staff as a staff writer, story editor, producer, showrunner. There is a quick communication if there's a problem. But the truth of the matter is once you turn it over to the director on the set and the director of photography, usually who's got a lot more power because they're more consistent, you just kind of like, okay, you guys understand the show. I put everything in there that you need. Let's go forward with it. And some shows are different. Some you get disappointed in what the result is. Other ones you're like, oh my God, they gave me a little treasure. I didn't see that in my writing. But usually you're not on the set. Now, the contentious thing with writers is that we feel like we're not allowed to be on the set. And in films, it's even worse. I mean, the writer is not even invited to the premiere of their own movie unless the director says it's okay. So unless it's in the contract specifically. So there's like I said, a big contentious issue about that. But one reason that, and something that writers should be careful of, if you are invited on the set of your show, don't become precious. Don't run up to the director or anybody else and saying, well, that's not my character. It's not your job. Your job is done. If they have a problem, they'll come to you. But once it goes into the hands of production and the directors and the actors, especially who have to interpret this, you back off. You are there to fix problems if they need it. Most of the time, they don't. The schedule is so quick, they really don't have a lot of time for problems. So most of the time, no. Now, when I'm producing, obviously, I can go down to the set anytime. And in fact, it became a running gag that I didn't want to. And that was because if I had to go down to the set, it meant there was a problem. So I didn't want to know about problems. And I would tell every director I worked with or who worked for me, I said, the moment you call action, this is your show. If you solve all the problems, if there's something you can't solve, call me. But other than that, I want to see your fingerprints on this. I want to see the actor's fingerprints. I want to see the grip's fingerprints on this. I want to see everybody's contribution.
Nice. So, Swamp Thing. How did you get involved with writing, and also how did you get involved with being a producer as well?
Well, we'll center around Swamp Thing because that's kind of where my first actual producing credit was. In the system that I worked in, and I was very fortunate with this, the people I worked with, I did a lot of shows at Stephen Cannell Productions first. And one of the mandates at that particular studio, you remember this, Stephen Cannell created, Riptide, the show I was on. He and Frank Lupo created that. They also created the A-Team, Hardcastle, McCormick. Those all came out of that house. Steve's attitude was that writers will eventually be producers. So the moment you are hired, you are invited into everything, post-production, pre-production, editing, everything, because he's training us. So as I moved up, I was already trained for the jobs ahead of me. So I was able to move into them. Now, as far as Swamp Thing is concerned, Swamp Thing had done, I believe, 20 episodes or 22 episodes with different producers. And USA Network had decided they might cancel the show. It wasn't doing great. So it's kind of like on the edge. And Boris Malden was one of the exec producers. His production company was producing it in Orlando. And so they basically said to him, well, we can bring it back if we cut your budget. And they cut it. So when that was done, USA then approached Tom Blomquist, who was a producer. And Tom was one of the producers on Riptide. So they brought him in to run the show at about just maybe 60% of the previous budget. So as soon as Tom got there, he wanted to bring in people that he had worked with before because he didn't have time to train somebody. So he brought myself in, and he brought another writer named Jeff Myro. So we came in as co-producers to work on this. And we would rotate through Orlando. Two of us would stay in Los Angeles. One would be one of the creative showrunners in Orlando when we were there. So when I was there, I was a creative showrunner. Boris Malden was the overall executive producer. Now, what that did, however, is because our budget was cut, we did not have the money to do all the special effects. We couldn't. If you didn't see it through the camera lens, we just couldn't do it. We didn't have the money to cut back to opticals, and you didn't have the big CGI engines that you have today. So we had to come up with stories that basically did not exercise the action superhero aspect of it, meaning the big superpower thing. And what we did was something that was kind of simple and kind of obvious. We went back to the roots, so to speak, of Swamp Thing, which was this dark, brooding character who was, wanted to do good, but was just like so much pain because of what he had become. And we decided to make the swamp itself into its own type of living presence, a Gaia type of presence. So what we started doing was we wrote stories that were more cerebral. They were more thought-provoking stories. And by doing that, we managed to call in favors with a lot of major actors and ask them to come in. I got Philip Michael Thomas from Miami Vice to come in. Tyne Daly, who was, Cagney and Lacey, of course, was her big one back then. She came in and did an episode for us. We got Debbie Boone, who was the singer at the time, a big singer. So we were able to reach out to these people and say, this is what we're doing. We're doing an interesting character study with every character we bring into it. And we did 50 episodes like that. And we did it for a budget that still mystifies people today. At the end of 50 episodes, we were our overage, literally, I probably had that amount on my desk right over here. We were really good on that. That also added to my reputation. So I was somebody known to bring in quality, deep characters, and at least close to the budget that I'm given.
That's awesome. And then, so how does that transition over to Xena?
Well, we've got a few steps between there and Xena, but there is kind of an interesting connectivity, though. So after Swamp Thing, I'm literally trying to remember all my credits. I had a conversation with my wife just yesterday about this, that when I have to introduce myself at talks, lectures, or conventions, I run off some of my credits. And I always end up saying, I think it's interesting, I can't remember all my credits. And she said, we should just go through IMDb. So I'm literally got IMDb over here to take a look at what the shows I did. So I did Swamp Thing, yes. Then I had Raven. I did a little animation, Walker, Texas Ranger. I didn't staff that. I wrote for that. Then we get up to Xena with also some development deals that were in there. You never see those on IMDb unless they go to series. But as far as Xena is concerned, I got a phone call from one of my close friends, a woman named Babs Grayhowski. Now, Babs was the executive producer on Riptide. She was the one who hired us. Tom was also on Riptide. So now you see the networking starts to work. So she called me because she had just been hired to be a supervising producer for this new show, which was a spinoff of Hercules. And she asked me, she said, would you be interested in this? And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I think I talked to somebody down there. I think I talked to Michael Ike a long time ago when they were developing the Hercules series. And she goes, well, there's a character here. It's being spun off from the series. The pilot is being written right now. We haven't started shooting. But there might be a character from the old Hercules series you would be really good at writing. I was like, cool. So the character she actually was talking about was a character called Salmonius, who was kind of a comedic character. But when I got in there, I met with Rob Tappert, who was the showrunner, and also with R.J. Stewart, who had developed it for television, also a showrunner. Liz Friedman, who was the associate producer, but later on went to became a really good writer and showrunner. Anyway, we all met, and during that meeting, I was asking questions about their series Xena. I had seen the episodes from Hercules that Xena was in, and I'd seen Hercules. So the question that I asked was, are you going to deal with demigods? And Rob was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, on Hercules, you're dealing with gods. Hercules is always in an adversarial position, but what about the gods in between? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't know. And just on the moment, I came up with this idea. I just basically say, well, there are like 3 of the sleep gods. One of them is named Morpheus. So let's say that Morpheus wants to kidnap Gabrielle, this character, because, and I just made this thing up. And when I did it, I finished it, Rob said, well, that's a good idea. And I said, yeah, it's a good idea. But, seriously, are you going to deal with demigods? So I was actually hired to write that episode. And just like the previous story, off of the first draft, they asked me if I'd come on staff. They didn't have any producing openings. I had been doing producing already, but I said as a creative consultant, sure, I'd love to. I love this idea, love the idea of the series. So I was initially hired as a creative consultant, but Babs then decided to go work on another project. So she was only committed to 6 episodes. She was going to leave. And so when she told me that, she said, go get my job. And I went, oh, that's right. So I went in and talked to R.J. Stewart, and I said, my producing credits. You have a position open. I'd like to have that. And he said, he goes, let me talk to Rob. And Rob said, let me talk to Sam Raimi. And Sam said, I don't know. What did R.J. say? And somehow I ended up as the supervising producer, which then led to being a co-exec producer.
That's awesome. So did you get to meet Sam Raimi?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like Sam. Sam's pretty cool. Yeah, my first experience with Sam was, I think Rob was in New Zealand, and so Sam was in a writer's room with us, and I had just come on the job. Now, as a preface to this, when I'm hired onto a job, I figure you've hired me for a reason. You value something that I bring to it. So I'm not shy about saying whether I agree with something or disagree with something. I figure you're paying for it. It doesn't matter who I'm working with, whether it was Steve Cannell, Frank Lupo, Glenn Larson. It doesn't matter. I speak up. But I always tell them, you're my boss. I'll do what you want, but you're paying for my creativity and my input. So we were doing a read-through of a script that had already been written. And we read the first scene. The actors weren't there. This was just us, the creative people in the room on the writing staff. So we read through the first scene, and Sam says, any comments? And I said, yeah. I said, we don't need this scene. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, when I went out through the list, I said, well, these are two characters we don't know anything about. They're saying the information that our characters are going to say, and practically the very next scene, there's nothing that's really moving me. It just seems like it's a blank spot before we get to the actual stuff we're interested in. And so, Sam thinks for a second. He goes, all right, we cut it. And we cut it, moved on. Now, later on, I found out that was a scene that Sam had specifically asked to have put in. But here's the cool thing about Sam. And other people have told me this. If you articulate what the issues are and he agrees with you, he doesn't have pride about that. He wants what's best for the project. So that was my first experience with Sam, which kind of told me what kind of a person he was. And yeah, he was great. I ran into him at Comic-Con last year. He was on a panel for, oh God, I can't remember the name of the movie. It's out right now. He was producing it. And it's funny because after it was over, I just kind of walked up there. He's waving at everybody, and I kind of shook hands with him and said, "Remember me?" And he goes like, "Oh yeah, Steve." Yeah, Sam's great and just great mind.
Yeah, he seems like a loyal guy because as I was looking through Xena's credits, Bruce Campbell, his brother's there, so yeah. he keeps the same crew around. But
yeah, we used to call them the Michigan Mafia because Rob Tapert, Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, they all came out of Michigan, and that's where they did Evil Dead. They did Evil Dead out of there.
Were you a fan of his before working on Xena?
I wasn't like a hardcore fan, but when I saw Evil Dead, what I really appreciated about it was, how do I put this? The tone was great. The comedy, the humor was just, it was great. It was classic Raimi, Campbell, Tappert type of humor. But it was how much they did on a limited budget. I've always been impressed by that. And I guess coming out of theater, where you don't have a lot of money and you have to yet build a gigantic set, I appreciate that. So I was picking up on things they were doing, like their reverse printing, and they would tie a camera to two boards and run through the forest, and that looks really hokey. Well, not if we speed it up. Okay, well, so they were solving problems and creating problems, which they then solved, which showed you how creative they were.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like what you did with Swamp Thing when the budget was cut.
Yeah. I will tell you, in Swamp Thing, there was we had a director named Steve Beers. Now, I knew Steve from Candle. He was an associate producer, and he later on became he's a big executive producer and just a wonderful guy. But he was a director as well. And this was the episode that Philip Michael Thomas was in. And one of the things we had to do in this episode, which I wrote, Philip Michael Thomas and his wife, characters in the show. Actually, they were married at one time, come to think of it. But in the show, they're ghosts. So at one big reveal toward the end, they have to be standing in front of a car at night, and the headlights come on the car, and it shines through them. Now, how do you do that when you cannot do opticals? In other words, if you don't see it through the lens, we can't do it. So Steve and I were sitting there just mulling over this, and I was like, heck, I wrote it. And then at one point, I kind of turned to Steve and I said, there's this old magician's trick. It's called a Pepper's Ghost. And basically what you do is, and this is what we did, you set the camera right across from the car. Then between them, you put a giant piece of transparent plexiglass at an angle. Then we reverse the costuming on our characters, put them off to the side. And as we're shooting the car, when the lights on the headlights come on, you bring the lights up over there, and their reflection is right there with the light coming through it. And I remember Steve Beers, he looks at me and he gets a big smile on his face, and he goes, Beers and Sears, doing it with mirrors. Now, for those of you who have been to Disney World or Disneyland, you have seen a Pepper's Ghost. The Haunted Mansion, the ballroom scene, all those dancers, that's a Pepper's Ghost.
Nice. So do you have a favorite project that you've worked on so far?
Okay. This is not a cop-out. This is the true thing. I'm not wired for favorites, because if I tell you what my favorite is right now, I will then have to amend myself in about 2 minutes. I'll say, no, wait, because my mood will change. Some that are very special in my heart. Riptide will always be there because that was my first experience, and I ended up with just so many incredible people that I worked with and have remained close friends to this day. Xena, obviously, Xena was an incredible experience. We were a dysfunctional family running that show. We'd have disagreements. We'd laugh. We'd go out to have lunch. We'd come back. We struggled over what we wanted to do with the show. Rob Tappert was an incredible conceptualist. I mean, he would come up with some like ideas that basically no other show would do. They would just say, no, we can't do that. That's way out of our purview. And then he would say, okay, you guys, let's figure this out. And we would figure it out, which I think added to the character of the show. That show has broke so many different boundaries in so many different areas. But also, I will say this, one of the things that has endeared me to that show specifically in my life is that it to this day has an incredible fandom. And they are really wonderful people. I have hung out with them. Heck, many of them have become actual friends, not just, oh, I love your show, but actual friends. We have another convention actually coming up in January, I believe. But it became like a big family. And the fandom was just great. And the most charitable people I have ever run into. I think since the show, Xena fandom has been directly or indirectly responsible for over $26 million worth of charity. Wow. They're just amazing people. And a lot of fandoms do that, but I've just never seen anything like the Xena fandom. So yeah, Riptide, Xena, but that's not to dismiss the other shows. I love every show I've worked on.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that about the Xena fan base, that they raised that much money. That's exceptional. And fans can be fantastic. Like there's a lot of good fan groups out there, and you know, sometimes it gets overshadowed with social media, but that makes me happy to hear that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, fans can be a wonderful force. And when we started doing Xena, for example, I was known as one of the, you know, internet people. The internet was really just breaking out in the late 90s. In fact, when I started working at Candle on Riptide, we still used typewriters. Steve then decided to buy everybody a computer, old 360K, you know, floppy disk type of drive things. And anytime something went wrong with the computer, we had to call tech support. But tech support was was another company, and it would take 2 or 3 days for them to come over and fix it. Well, television, you don't have that time. So I started fixing people's computers. I started finding workarounds. So when the internet broke open, I was immediately on it. I searched out one of the first AOL chat rooms for Xena. A 14-year-old girl named Laura Thompson had actually created it. And I made this agreement with myself and to everybody else. I said, look, if I go into a chat room, I'm not going to lurk. I'm going to let you know who I am. However, if you want to talk about episodes that you want to pitch, I will leave the room for obvious reasons. Or if you have to talk about me, I will leave the room with no animosity. I don't care, because I wanted the free exchange of information. So the studio was a little uncomfortable with that because they weren't sure, you know, what we would tell the fans. But after a while, Universal became just a mensch about it. They were kind of like, you know what, you guys are doing all right. We're going to look the other way here. And because of that, my association with the Xena fans became a lot more interactive. So that by the time we were doing conventions, you know, I don't hide behind the curtains. I just walk out and have fun with people. And I can always tell a new fan at a convention because when I walk in, they're kind of like, I think that's Mr. Sears. I think that might be Mr. And if I see that, well, pre-COVID, I would just walk over to them. I would say, all right, let's get this out of the way. Hug or no hug. Let's just get it over with. So by the time we run into each other at the next convention, it's just, hey, Steve, which is kind of how I prefer it. So, but the fans are great. Fans of any show, really, I think are just fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for your time. But before I let you go, what do you got coming up now? Like, what are you working on?
I am working on several things right now. I have 3 projects that are in various stages of development, not placed just yet. The industry is still kind of figuring out where it is these days. I have moved into writing prose. I have been contributing to anthologies. Jeff Sturgeon's Last Cities on Earth, which is back there somewhere. I wrote 2.5 stories. I co-wrote one with Jeff in that. I also am now a member of the Alien versus Predator universe because I contributed a story to the Alien versus Predator. There it is. That one right there, which was an first anthology they did. So I'm in that. I also wrote this book right here. This is a graphic novel called Stalag X, and I co-wrote that with Kevin J. Anderson. Kevin and Brian Herbert write all the Dune sequel books, and Kevin's a fantastic writer. And that one right now is in development. At least it has a development deal right now with Francis Lawrence, who directed 3 of the Hunger Games. Oh, all except one of the Hunger Games movies. I guess he directed 4, plus I Am Legend, Constantine, Red Sparrow, which is one of my favorite movies. And then this little book here is just a book about, I know I sound like I'm doing a commercial.
That's fine. I like that.
This one is just basically a book I wrote about working in the television industry. It's called The Non-User-Friendly Guide for Aspiring TV Writers. It's not necessarily to teach you to write. It's just basically what you can expect to experience in the business. So I've got 2 other novels in the works, and I have a collection of short stories called Tales from the Above Ground Underground, which will be coming out in January. And yes, and the other things, unfortunately, the film and the television projects I'm working on, I can't really go into detail at the moment. So other than that, I'm just kind of like, kicking back, having fun.
Nice, everybody. I will put the links to all of his stuff down below. And where can everybody find you online?
If you Google Stephen L. Sears, you will probably see me. My website is Stephen L. Sears, one word. You don't have to put the period in it. I can, my name is right there, but just one word is Stephen L. Sears without the period. My name is not Stephen Sears. My name is not Steve Sears. I've had to send back contracts because of this. Every writer knows you have to brand yourself. So if you go to stephensears.com without the L, you'll end up at a website about cleaning kids' ears. So Stephen L. Sears, that's my website. I have to update it, but there are links there. But, if you go to Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, I'm still on the other place that I don't want to talk about at the moment because I'm just not going to be active there. But just, Google my name or FSU Writer. And that means FSU Writer, Florida State University Writer. That's my handle on most of these things. And that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Stephen, so much for joining me.
Absolutely.